This lecture seems as if it were taken from a science fiction movie, for it will reveal that all events in the world do not occur randomly, and even the dates on which they take place are astonishingly precise. After decades of research, I have discovered that in contrast to modern astrology, which is false and not kosher, the sages of Israel mastered a true and sublime wisdom, through which it is possible to reveal prophetic matters. Astrology is based on the assumption that each person has certain points in the zodiac, which are uniquely related to them. When a planet passes through one of these points, a certain effect is exerted on the person, and sometimes a physical phenomenon even occurs. The same applies to nations and states. Each field has a point in the zodiac associated with it. First, the point in the zodiac must be identified and understood, and then the planet passing through it must be examined. To decipher the heavenly code, I rely only on 5 planets and the lunar node. On a practical level, if 2 different events occur, and in both of them a certain planet passes through the same point, this indicates a certain connection between them. The type of connection is determined by the nature of the point itself. For example, the planet Neptune was located at the moment of the destruction of the Second Temple at exactly the same point as it was at the moment of the destruction of the First Temple. Another example. In both tragic events, the mass murders at Auschwitz and the terrible massacre of October 7th, at the moment of their occurrence, the planet Uranus was located at exactly the same point. In both of these examples, the connection is clear due to the shocking similarity between the 2 events. We will now analyze the celestial system for these 2 events, the disengagement and the massacre on October 7th, in both of which the lunar node was located at the same point. Here there is no external similarity between the events, but the celestial system indicates that there is nevertheless an internal connection, that the spiritual aspect of the disengagement qualified its severe consequences in the massacre. In other words, without the first event, the second would not have occurred. Up until now, we've been talking about the same astronomical body appearing at the same point, but sometimes it's 2 different planets that have aligned at the same location. But first, a fundamental rule must be established. A negative event in the world occurs only after God subjects the people to a series of spiritual tests. It is enough for just one test to fail, and the event will not occur at all. One of the important tests is related to the definition of Jewish identity. In 1950, the Law of Return was enacted, which stated that every Jew is entitled to immigrate to Israel. In 1970, the law was detailed to include anyone born to a Jewish mother or who converted even if the conversion was not in accordance with Jewish law, such as a Reform conversion. In addition, the Ministry of the Interior also registers Jewish under the nationality section on the identity card. For decades, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader of the Chabad movement, fought publicly to change the law so that only those who have undergone a proper conversion according to Jewish law will be recognized as Jews. His goal was to prevent the infiltration of non-Jews into the Jewish people and assimilation from within. In his talks on the subject, the Rebbe could be heard speaking with deep pain about the destruction it causes and will cause in the future. In one of his talks, he explained painfully that there is a spiritual barrier separating Jews from non-Jews, and that this barrier defines Jewish identity according to the Torah. When this barrier is destroyed, the physical barrier separating the land of Israel from its neighbors could also be breached, and as a result, enemies of Israel could break through the country's borders and harm the people. Despite years of struggle, the law was not amended, and the court even expanded its interpretation several times. For example, a person who is not Jewish himself but is the grandson of a Jew is also included in the rights of the law. Shortly before the October 7th massacre, the Supreme Court began preparing to expand the definition of the grandchild clause. And chillingly, just as the Lubavitcher Rebbe predicted, the consequences were not long in coming. Terrorists breached the fence separating Israel from the Gaza Strip, brutally murdered more than 1,000 Jews, and kidnapped over 200. It was precisely on this fence, estimated to have cost $1 billion, that the IDF relied to protect Israel from terrorists. Now, look at this unbelievable, On November 13th, about 5 weeks after the massacre began, while the people of Israel were burying the murdered and their loved ones were imprisoned in the tunnels of Hamas under severe torture, it was still important for the High Court of Justice to hurry up and issue the ruling to expand the grandchild clause. And on the day the court published the law, the celestial system revealed that this day was like the destruction of the temple in a spiritual sense. Because on that day the lunar node stood exactly at the point where Neptune stood on the day that both the first and second temples were destroyed. This is not to say that this was the direct cause of the massacre, but that it was one of the essential tests that qualified its occurrence. The root of the problem began with the original law of return on July 5, 1950, when then Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion left the definition of who is a Jew vague and unclear. Even then, the celestial system defined the enactment of this law as the destruction of a spiritual temple, because on the day it was enacted, the lunar node was located exactly at the same spot where it stood on the day of the destruction of the second temple. Even worse, leaving the law without amendment leads to assimilation, which will result in the cessation of the seed of Israel. After all, even if the father is Jewish but the mother is not Jewish, their children are not considered Jews according to the Torah. This is in fact the destruction of the Jewish nation in a different form but with the same result as that cruel plot of the final solution, the extermination of the Jewish nation by Hitler. May his name be erased. Now look at this. On March 1, 2021, the court ruled that in addition to what had already been determined in the past, that people who underwent Reform conversion abroad would be considered Jews, the court added that Reform conversions performed in the land of Israel would also be recognized as Jews. And horrifyingly, Uranus stood on this day at the point where Saturn was when the Auschwitz camp began operating. In the following lectures, I will reveal additional important dates related to this topic and prove how the celestial system discloses that we stand on the threshold of exile. The conclusion is that there are no coincidences.